It's finally happening. It's finally happening. I have the story, I have the proof right here. And hopefully it's not going to surprise you, because announced today, a few hours ago, that MicroStrategy, has sold 3,588 Bitcoin for $216 million to fund dividends on their digital credit securities. As of 7/5/2026, they hodl 843,775 Bitcoin. So 843,775 Bitcoin in the reserves, and they have $2.5 billion in their USD reserves. Wild things out here, but not that wild, because we talked about it before. And MicroStrategy also sold 32 Bitcoin before to test the market to see how they respond. And it's kind of funny. So they announced this came out today that they sold this. And if you go and look at the Bitcoin chart from today and yesterday, so yesterday there was this big dip down, right, leading into the morning. So overnight, hey, I'm looking at my chart, basically from about, 5 p.m. Pacific down until, let's see here, 7 a.m. this morning, the Bitcoin price was going down, with big drop-offs happening right around, 5 a.m., which is 8 a.m. Eastern, so 5 a.m. Pacific. Bitcoin dropped from 63,696 all the way down to, or actually that's what it was at now, so let me see if I can get the price there. So the high on this candle, I'm just scrolling on my phone. Here, it was 62.8 or 62.9 basically at 5 a.m. this morning, and then it dropped all the way down to 61.3 at the 7 a.m. Pacific candle, so that's 10 a.m. Eastern, and then from there, it has since popped back up, hitting a high of 63.8 and is currently around, 63.6. Pretty wild to see that, and it's kind of funny when MicroStrategy was announcing they're buying a bunch of Bitcoin, the price seemed to go down, and then when they sell a bunch, the price goes up. But we talked about this, and MicroStrategy has even announced it, that they will have to periodically sell some of their Bitcoin reserves to keep the balance right with their USD reserves, so that they can continue to fund their dividends, right, on their digital credit securities, things like Strike and things like that. So I think this is a good thing for the market, right? I think it is great and idealistic for Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy to try and just only buy Bitcoin and then raise capital. But that is a very narrow investment strategy. And when you're working with the billions of dollars, and this is what you hope, right? Sometimes the world doesn't operate how you think it should or how you hope, but you hope that they have high quality, experienced, smart people that are like, okay, great, let's do this for as long as we can, but then let's also have contingency plans for if and when the time comes where we can't just continue to push forward on the strategy, or we basically exhaust the strategy for that point in time, and we need to change things up, i.e. sell Bitcoin. And that has happened, right? That has happened. The key thing for them and the company, which I'm not really commenting on, officially or anything like that, is that, they have a responsibility, because these are securities, to make clear statements to their investors, right, and not go against their statements that they've made, so that they aren't misleading investors, right? That is on them to do. And if you're investing in securities, right, the pro is that you do have a little more legal enforcement on the rules with the SEC and all of that, that can protect you as the investor a little bit more so than you do straight just investing in something like Bitcoin. Of course, I'm not a financial advisor. This isn't financial advice. It's a good time to say that. You need to make your own decisions and do your own research. But as an investor in a company, you should read their statements. You should read what they put out so you understand the investments, okay? Most people don't, but that is your responsibility as an investor, and is the responsibility of the operators of that company to be clear and transparent according to the law. So hopefully they've checked all the boxes there, and it seems like they've done a decent job at that, even if people don't fully agree in their positions. But I think ultimately people don't want MicroStrategy. Most people, right, don't want MicroStrategy to completely collapse and disband and have to sell all their Bitcoin. People like Peter Schiff, they say it's only a matter of time. for them to completely collapse and go up in a ball of flames and have to dump all their Bitcoin on the market. And obviously that would create a liquidation cascade and it would drop the price. Because the problem with that is if they have to be forced sellers, right, where they don't get to choose when to sell, which is a position you don't really want to be in as a big company, is that you just have to sell at the market price, right? And so you have to sell as much as you can. And the issue is as you sell more, as you drive down the price, you have to sell even more Bitcoin because it's worth less in order to fund your liabilities, obligations, meet margin requirements, and all that fun stuff, okay? That's what we don't want to see with MicroStrategy and Bitcoin, and really any company, because that's a death spiral for them. And if that happens, okay, then you will likely see a bunch of selling in the Bitcoin market. Okay, you'll likely see the price dip down. And we're at right the stage in this market, in this cycle, where a lot of people think that we might have a further leg down with Bitcoin. Now, it's interesting to see the strength on Bitcoin. Perhaps some of that has come from the Trump accounts announcement that came out today about being able to sign your child that was born. There's a time range in which your child was born. You can sign up for the Trump accounts and there'll be investments there. And I think that's a good topic for another video, talking about how to strategically think about that. I think if you're a new parent, and I'm a new uncle, not a new parent, but a new uncle. And so I don't think about this as directly, but thinking about my brother and his new kid, I've sent him those articles and things. And I've thought about this before in the situation if and when I have kids, and even reflecting on my own childhood, thinking, man, I wish my parents would have had a plan in place like that and were strategically, sorry, I'm turning my screen back on because it changes the lighting when the screen goes off, but it goes like light to dark, light to dark. I'm using my monitor as one of my backlights here, or my highlight lights. I'm butchering the terms right now. This is not about lighting, but having that in place would be amazing. And the numbers are actually pretty reasonable when you look at it to grow, because it's just math, right? How much you need to invest and where, and to grow wealth for your child, so by the time they hit 18, 25, 30, whatever the milestones you want in their life, that they actually have a significant financial cushion. And it's surprisingly affordable. Like, you don't have to be super wealthy, super rich. You don't got to make a ton of extra money to make this work. But it requires you to understand and know about that, and to put a plan in place and to not deviate from that plan. That's where a lot of people mess up, right? And this is just traditional finance, personal finance 101. They don't budget. They don't know where the money comes from. They don't know where it goes. They don't know what it's spending on and all of that. And they don't have plans in place for that. So part of this Bitcoin jump could be attributed to Trump releasing that and then mentioning that, hey, we might include crypto in the investment fund. So that's interesting. Now, that's just speculation on why it's up today. Maybe the market was absorbing some of MicroStrategy, or that dip provided an opportunity where it's these certain liquidity levels. There's a whole bunch of factors that are coming into play here. But with that said, we're at 63. Without Bitcoin breaking out, decisively above 64 and above $69,000, we're still in that bearish trend, okay? And so if we don't break out above 64 and sustain that for a little bit, to give us, fuel for that next leg up, it's very likely and probable that we might experience another drawdown that can happen. And you'd be looking for that to happen, from 64, breaking down under 60 again, okay? Because that's been that level of support and resistance that we've kind of been flirting with. And then you'd be really looking for what happens if Bitcoin breaks that $55,000 level. And if it does that, we could see it drop pretty quickly down to the low 50s, mid to high 40s. And then if strategy becomes a forced seller, that could be the final catalyst or event that takes us down into that low to mid, into the 30 ranges for a cycle low. Now, is that the official cycle low? When does that happen? Who knows? But in theory, that could play out over the next, kind of 1 to 3 months if it does play out. Everyone I've talked to in the crypto space is all kind of having that projection as the, what they're looking for as the bottom. So a lot of them do think, of talking with teams over the past few days, they do think that we might experience another leg down in Bitcoin, and that will happen over the next 1 to 3 months, okay? And when that happens, that could be the final drawdown to set in the final bottom, and then we'll start moving up. And of course, this can correspond with Clarity Act coming into play, midterms, and politicians coming out and saying positive things. It could come on the back of the Fed announcing that inflation is going down, which inflation has been high, which is one of the reasons why they haven't lowered rates. And so I have the perspective that they're looking at that and saying, okay, well, if we keep inflation high, or if it's high now, that gives us more room to then come out a month, 2 months, 3 months closer to midterms and say, hey, look, remember when inflation was high over the summer? Well, we've dropped inflation. And if you know anything about inflation, like they've just slowed the rate of increase in prices, but they haven't stopped it, right? So it's cumulative, it adds up. Even if it's 4% 1 month, and of course, we all know that inflation's much higher than 4% of what they share with you. They're always adjusting that. But if it's 4% 1 month and goes to 3% the next month, it's still up 3%, right? But it's not up as much. And so, of course, they'll use that narrative to spin that. And so you could see that likely happening. And of course, if we see oil prices continue to come down, the conflict in Iran hopefully finally settle at some point, right? Then that can contribute to, of course, that kind of easing tensions, less kind of risk-off feelings, and then we could potentially see talks about maybe lowering rates. Obviously, that's positive. And ultimately, if and when we do end up lowering rates, if that happens, that is just like adding fuel to the fire for growth in things like crypto risk-on assets. And especially if it comes at a time where crypto has played out its full cycle, which is kind of what it's doing, that full 4-year cycle, played that out and started on that upswing, right? You could see this like confluence of factors that could lead to that growth and the springboard into the next bull market. So what do you do now? What do you think about this? Just keep paying attention. Just know patience is the most important thing. You want to make sure you have, of course, not financial advice. I have dry powder so that I can capitalize on dips, so that I'm ready, holding cash. I'm not diving into a ton of risky positions at this point in time because there's that time decay, right? Even smaller altcoins, microcaps, that kind of stuff. There are opportunities, right? The best thing is to learn about these projects, do your research, see which ones are worthwhile and potentially will catch narratives in this next cycle that are actually doing things, which teams have survived, which ones are still building, which teams are still putting out content. And then from there, right, start to figure out and create plans for making your positions. And so a lot of stuff here, but I think we still just are playing that, hurry up and wait game to see how this stuff plays out. And ultimately, you're probably not going to catch the bottom, just like you probably aren't going to catch the top. And so your goal is just to be generally in that ballpark and positioned. And I know this is like where the lowest sentiment is for crypto, and people are the least interested in it, especially being summer and all of that and World Cup. But these are the times when there's not the enthusiasm, when there's not the FOMO, when there's not all of that smart strategic investors are positioning themselves so that they can capture some of those lows. So when they do have the upswings, they have more of a chance of being able to capture some of that. On top of that, knowing how long bull markets last, certain positions put in place now, right, depending on your local jurisdiction, become more favorable for your taxes when and if you do sell that position later on. Generally, holding the position for a year plus in the United States gives you long-term capital gains tax versus short-term capital gains tax. And so that can be very advantageous for a lot of people. And so it's the people that come in late to the FOMO and are rushing in, buying at the top, or buying, catching that upswing and selling fast, but then they get wrecked on taxes. So you want to have that and be thinking about that for your strategy and how to play out this next cycle when it starts up again. And just be ready, right? Have your stuff set up, have your plan in place for these dips. Things are getting into pretty good buying opportunities, assuming we are at the end of this bear market or nearing the end, and we will see that upswing. But one final thing, that doesn't mean all projects are created equally. Doesn't mean all projects that have done well in the past will do well in the future. Narratives change, times change, interests change, projects change. And so you just want to keep that in mind. Don't be the person that was like, hey, well, all these projects were the hot projects last cycle, so they're going to be the hot projects this cycle. Maybe some of them will, but don't overweight the fact that they were good last time, so therefore they should be good this time. You want to be looking for the edge and the opportunities here. So that is it. Do I expect more MicroStrategy selling? Probably they will sell more in the future. And I think overall, I think it's a good plan that they have a more dynamic Bitcoin strategy in place versus just buy and hold. I think it's good for them. I think it's good for the market as long as they can sustain that and have smart people in place that, you know, can execute a solid plan that works. I think it's good for everyone there. So that is it for this one. Be safe, be smart out there, and make sure you do your own research, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.